Greetings and the warmest of welcomes to the Australia-China Media Watch podcast. In this episode, we are looking at news representations from the Global Times running from the 14th of February 2022 to the 20th of February 2022. During the course of the week, there were 19 mentions of Australia in the Global Times, and in contrast, Sky News Australia had 10 mentions of China for the week. In comparison, in the previous week, starting from Monday the 7th of February to Sunday the 13th of February, there were 26 mentions of Australia in the Global Times, and there were 7 mentions of China from Sky News Australia. So 19 for this week from the Global Times and 10 from Sky News Australia for the same period. Let's start unpacking by looking at the Global Times. The first article we'll be looking at comes from the author Hu Xijin, who was the previous editor of the Global Times, if I'm not wrong. If my memory serves me correctly, Hu Xijin was born in the 1960s, Chinese journalist and former editor-in-chief and party secretary of the Global Times, seems to have a platform for returning. Well, let's take a closer look. Published February 15th, 2022 at 10:02 p.m. This article was found in the Viewpoint section of the Global Times with the headline, "The world needs to reject the US's evil script in Asia and Europe." The article has an accompanying image with the following captions. US troops deploy for Europe from Pope Army Airfield at Fort Bragg, North Carolina on February the 3rd, 2022. The opening paragraph of the article reads, "The situation in Ukraine has almost hit a boiling point. US President Joe Biden told its European allies that Russian forces could attack Ukraine on February 16th, namely tomorrow. The US also announced the temporary closure of its embassy in Kiev and the evacuation of a small number of diplomats to the western Ukraine city of Lviv." I hope I'm getting the pronunciation of that correct. Many of Ukraine's wealthy fled on private jets, and the Ukraine president has proclaimed February 16th as Unity Day, when flags are to be raised and the national anthem to be played. Russia denounced the hysteria in the West about an impending Russian invasion as absurd. The situation is confusing. Hu continues to write, "The world will keep watching the situation in Ukraine. Tomorrow is February 16th, and if Russia does not attack on that date, it will be a slap on the face of US intelligence agencies, and President Biden will be the biggest maker and purveyor of rumors." The Ukraine issue alone already frustrates the West. However, recently Western public opinion has been linking the situation in Ukraine into the Taiwan question, claiming that if Russia succeeds in Ukraine, the Chinese mainland will follow suit to win over Taiwan and may even take action against Taiwan at the same time. A recent statement by Australian Defence Minister Peter Dutton put the Ukraine issue side by side with the Taiwan question, and Western parliamentarians and media have made similar analyses. The Taiwan Authority has set up a so-called special task force to study the impact of the situation in Ukraine on Taiwan's security. Taiwan leader Tsai Ing-wen claimed that Taiwan has faced military threats and intimidation from China for a long time, and we empathize with Ukraine's situation. Such clamor equates Taiwan's political status with that of Ukraine. As we all know, Taiwan is an inalienable part of China, and one China is internationally recognized. Even in the US's anti-China public opinion system, Taiwan's status has been vaguely dealt with. Let's take a closer look at mentions of Australia in the article. And it appears in the following paragraph, and that will make paragraph number 3. As mentioned earlier, the recent statement made by Australian Defence Minister Peter Dutton. There is another mention that appears a number of paragraphs down, and that reads, as China-India relations deteriorate, the border issue between the two countries has become intractable. Australia has adopted a hostile policy toward China, while Japan has gotten increasingly tough toward China. Who can say if there is no connection between these changes, or that the US is not the one pushing these countries from behind? No further mentions of Australia is found in the article, and based on that first impression in answering the question, is there potentially evidence for an othering offensive in play, the construction of a negative and repulsive Australia, I would like to make the argument that the answer is clearly in the realm of yes. We'll move along to the next article. This next piece is also published on the 15th of February, this time around by Global Times staff reporters. It's found in the economy section of the Global Times with the following headline: China-New Zealand ratify upgraded version of FTA deal to inject more vitality into regional economy. The article comes with an accompanying image with the following captions. Photo taken on November 10th, 2020 shows the Xiamen area of China, also known as Fujian, a pilot-free trade zone in Xiamen, East China's Fujian province. The opening paragraph is as follows. China and New Zealand have ratified an upgraded version of the long-standing free trade agreement, which is expected to inject more vitality into the two economies. It marks an important step in implementing the Free Trade Agreement FTA upgrade strategy, experts and business people said. Before I keep going, I'd just like to point out I may have made a mistake earlier. I think I may have mentioned that Xiamen area is also known as Fujian. That is probably highly incorrect. Xiamen would make a part of the Fujian province. And that province, of course, sitting in the southeast part of China. The following paragraph reads, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce, also known as MOFCOM, M-O-F-C-O-M, on Tuesday said that the two countries had completed the domestic approval procedures for the upgraded version, which comes into effect on April 7th. The upgraded FTA will see both countries open their markets for a range of wood and paper products and optimize trade rules such as rules of origin, and remove technical barriers to trade and customs facilitation, the MOFCOM said in a statement. We'll take a closer look at mentions of Australia, and it appears a number of times. First of which is in the following paragraph, and that relates to the RCEP. And for the sake of context, I'm also going to be reading out the prior paragraph. And that reads, the upgraded deal also marks an improvement of the quality and efficiency of China-New Zealand free trade relations on the basis of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, also known as the RCEP, the world's largest free trade one, which came into force in January this year. RCEP includes the 10 members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and 5 major economies in the region: China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. Australia is mentioned again in the following paragraph, which reads, in 2008, China signed an FTA with New Zealand, the first FTA between China and a developed economy. The two sides announced the conclusion of their 3-year negotiations on the upgrade in November 2019. The upgrade comes as New Zealand is competing with other countries, including Australia, to supply farm goods to China. Australia is mentioned once again in the following paragraphs, and that reads, closer trade relations between China and New Zealand should be a strong driving force for Australia to correct its wrongdoings and restore China-Australia economic and trade relations. Wang from the organization GETRONZ said, since 2020, the Australian government has made frequent attacks on China on a number of major issues concerning China's core interests, which have seriously undermined the mutual trust between the two countries, he said. The Australian side should make more substantive efforts to bring back China-Australia relations to normalcy. In terms of the tonality of the article, one might make the argument that Australia is represented in a clearly negative way as well. With that in mind, we'll be moving along to the next article. Published on the 15th of February in the economy section of the Global Times, this headline reads, Regulators warn iron ore traders not to engage in price gouging and profiteering. No author has been mentioned in this instance. It's simply labeled by the Global Times, and the article comes with an accompanying photograph with the following captions: an iron ore mining site in Australia, photo by CNS Photos. The opening paragraph reads, China's market regulator warned iron ore traders not to engage in price gouging, and it will take effective measures to ensure market stability amid inflating prices of iron ore. It is a fresh move from the government as it vows to crack down on hoarding and speculation. The State Administration for Market Regulation, SAMR, said that it is getting to details about port inventories of iron ore trading companies and their participation in futures and spot trading. The regulator warned enterprises not to fabricate and publish false price information and not to drive up prices. The regulator, together with other departments including the National Development and Reform Commission, the NDRC, and China Securities Regulatory Commission, called on relevant state-owned enterprises to take responsibility to help the government ensure supply and stabilize prices. We'll take a closer look at mentions of Australia, and it appears once in the captions, which I had just read out earlier, and it looks like that was the only mention for the article. From this vantage point, one might make the argument that Australia is represented in a neutral manner. With that in mind, we will be moving along to the next article. Although as I'm scanning through the page once again, perhaps the message is a little bit more subtle in nature, with companies such as Australia seems to be the only country that is alluded to throughout the article. I know that Rio Tinto is mentioned over here, and I believe that Rio Tinto has its roots in Spain. So I think for now, based on this first impression, I would put it within range of neutral to somewhat negative. We move along to the next piece. Originally published in Reuters, this next headline reads, in a rare move, Trudeau uses measures to cut off protesters' funding, with the subheader Canadian PM invokes emergency powers. Published 15th of February 2022 at 6:08 p.m. The article is accompanied by a photograph with the following captions. Justin Trudeau, Canada's Prime Minister, speaks during a news conference in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, on December 15th, 2021. The opening paragraph of the article reads, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Monday activated rarely used emergency powers in an effort to end protests that have shut some US border crossings and paralyzed parts of the capital. Under the Emergencies Act, the government introduced measures intended to cut off protesters' funding and took steps to reinforce provincial and local law enforcement with federal police. The blockades are harming our economy and endangering public safety, Trudeau told a news conference. We cannot and will not allow illegal and dangerous activities to continue. Australia is mentioned in the article a number of times. Hang on. I apologize, it looks like Australia appears once in the article instead, and it's found in the following paragraph. The quote-unquote Freedom Convoy protests started by Canadian truckers opposing a COVID-19 vaccinate or quarantine mandate for cross-border drivers have drawn people opposed to Trudeau's policies on everything from pandemic restrictions to a carbon tax. Copycat trucker protests have also sprung up in Israel, France, Australia, and New Zealand. No further mentions of Australia is found in the article. And to answer the question if there is evidence of an othering offensive taking place in this instance, one might argue that Australia is represented here and constructed here in a somewhat negative manner. With that in mind, we move along to the next piece. This article comes with the following headline: ASEAN unlikely to be attracted by Quad expansion. Found in the Viewpoint section of the Global Times and published by Zhang Jie, February 15th, 2022 at 2:51 p.m. The article is accompanied by a photograph of the Australian PM with the US Secretary of State, the Australian Foreign Minister, the Indian External Affairs Minister, and Japan's Foreign Minister before a court meeting in Melbourne on February 11th, 2022. The opening paragraph of the article reads, the Foreign Ministers of Australia, India, Japan, and the US met in Melbourne, Australia, Friday for the 4th Quad Foreign Ministers meeting. In a joint statement released after the meeting, support for the outlook on the Indo-Pacific by the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, was highlighted. This led to media discussions about Quad expansion, especially how the Quad could work with other multilateral organizations, such as ASEAN, to counterbalance China's influence. The Quad, it says in the following paragraph, has two tasks in terms of strengthening mechanism. One is upgrading the mechanism and the other is expansion. Given that the Quad now has annual ministerial meetings and summits, its most important task is expansion, both in fields of cooperation and summits, both in fields of cooperation and of membership apologies. The expansion of membership is more crucial as the Quad has already changed from a security mechanism into a comprehensive framework involving cooperation on anti-pandemic efforts, high technology, climate change, security, and the economy. Scholars at home and abroad believe that Quad Plus includes at least two formats, one of which is directly absorbing certain countries as fixed members, but it seems to be difficult since everyone now basically agrees that the Quad aims at building a regional security network with allied partners in order to contain China. Most countries and regions do not want to choose sides between China and the US and are therefore apprehensive about joining the Quad directly. We'll take a closer look at mentions of Australia in the article, and it appears in the captions, which has been covered so far. Australia appears twice in the opening paragraph, and let's take a look if it appears subsequently. The answer to that is no, and based on that initial impression, do we see evidence of othering in this instance? The conscious or unconscious assumption that a certain identified group poses a threat to the favored group? And I believe the answer to that would make a clear yes, it is a negative construction of Australia in this instance. With that in mind, we'll move along to the next article for the week from the Global Times. The next piece is published on the 16th of February with the following headline: War-hungry US hypes China's threat to Darwin to rally allies and shift domestic attention. This was found in the Observer section of the Global Times. No author has been identified, and this was published 10:16 p.m. February the 16th. The article's opening paragraph reads, February 19th, 2022 marks the 80th anniversary of Japan's attack on the Australian city of Darwin and its port. Instead of warning Australia to keep vigilant against the revival of Japanese militarism, an article on the anniversary by a US media outlet groundlessly hyped the so-called China's military threat to Darwin, which sounds very absurd. Darwin is still strategically important, and just for context, the article that has been cited in this in this report comes in from the businessinsider.com website. The next paragraph reads, Darwin is still strategically important, but now Australia is worried about threats from a different source, China. The Business Insider said in its piece on Wednesday entitled, 80 years after Australia's Pearl Harbor, tensions with China are raising fears of another attack down under. US media outlets have been attempting to label China with various threats. China's military buildup is entirely to serve defensive demands. China has never and will not take the initiative to attack any country, and its so-called threat of attacking Australia is baseless. But the Australian government and military have cooperated with the US's Indo-Pacific Strategy, sending its warships and aircraft in the Pacific, even to the South China Sea, to engage in military exercises with the US and its allies. These practices pose a threat to the peace and security of the Asia-Pacific region. The Business Insider's rhetoric on China is to confuse right and wrong. But take a closer look at mentions of Australia, and it looks like it's appearing a few more times in this piece. The following paragraph reads, the US media's intent is to drive a further wedge between China and Australia, more firmly tying Australia in the US's anti-China chariot. Wei Dongxu, a Beijing-based military expert, told the Global Times, Washington is building a trilateral security partnership called AUKUS, attempting to draw on the military forces of Australia and the UK to carry out more military deterrence and strategic containment against China in the Western Pacific region. Furthermore, as the US has strengthened military cooperation with Australia, it would increase its troops deployment in Australia, and the troops of the US allies, such as the UK, could base its defense assets in Australia. Some critics in Australia are worried about retaliation once the military of the US and its allies exploits Australia as a springboard to take some offensive actions toward the Indo-Pacific region or even the South China Sea. The US media may hope to persuade and win the support of these critics by fabricating the so-called China threat to Darwin. It is hoped that these critics and more Australians remain sober. It is risky for Australia to be controlled by the US in terms of military. There is a Chinese saying that when the city gate catches fire, the fish in the moat suffer. If the US launches an attack and military provocation based on Australian military facilities, this will be the consequence encountered by Australia. even though it was Japan that attacked Darwin 80 years ago and the ghost of Japanese militarism is still lingering, Australia will not be wary of Japan. Led by the US, the military cooperation between Australia and Japan is getting closer. After signing several documents such as a Defense Cooperation Pact in January, the military cooperation between Japan and Australia will be further deepened. Australia is behaving like someone forgot the pain after the wound is healed, Wei commented. We'll take a closer look at further mentions of Australia. It appears that there are no further mentions, and just to cap things off, let's take a closer look at the concluding paragraph of the article. The US is sparing no effort to tout the war threat of China and Russia to the world. It happens against the backdrop in which the US has been mired in acute domestic conflicts ranging from racism to extreme political divisions. By hyping external threats from China and Russia, Washington is deliberately creating a crisis to divert the attention from what is happening at home. Such practices can also help contain its top rivals, China and Russia, and intimidate its allies into closer military ties with the US. The international community, including the US's allies, should remain vigilant towards the US in this regard. In this case, do we see evidence of an othering offensive in play? Is Australia constructed as a negative and repulsive other? I believe the answer to that is a clear yes. With that in mind, we'll be moving along to the next piece. Published on the 16th of February as well, comes the following headline. Targeting China makes US Indo-Pacific Strategy goals unachievable. This is found in the opinion columnists section of the Global Times and written by Ding Gang. The article comes with an accompanying image, a screenshot of the US Indo-Pacific Strategy. The opening paragraph of the article reads, a year after Biden took office, the US released its much-anticipated US Indo-Pacific Strategy on February 11th. It is a report drenched in poison, says the Global Times. The next paragraph reads, the US Indo-Pacific Strategy cited Biden's speech on September 24th, 2021 at the First Leaders Summit of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, the QSD, between the United States, Japan, India, and Australia. He emphasized then that the future of each of our nations, and indeed the world, depends on a free and open Indo-Pacific enduring and flourishing in the decades ahead. This wasn't so much a justification of the strategy, but a classic example of grandstanding by the US. Biden is right that development in the Asia-Pacific region has a decisive impact on the future of the world, but the report deliberately avoids why the Asia-Pacific region is so important and how the importance of this region has been built up over the past 3 or 4 decades. Because as long as the development of the Asia-Pacific region is mentioned, it is impossible to avoid the rise of China's driving force. Australia is mentioned once in the article, which was previously covered, and that relates to its role in the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. Based on this first impression, I think I might make the argument that Australia is in this instance drawn with the line in the sand in the them category, constructed as negative, constructed as a believer, a subscriber of the grandstanding strategy by the US. With that in mind, we'll move along to the next article. The article is written by Ding Gang, a senior editor of People's Daily and a senior fellow with the Chongyang Institute of Financial Studies. I do apologize for neglecting to have added in this step in the previous articles, something I need to bear in mind as I keep moving along. With that said, we'll move along with the next piece. And this comes in on the 16th of February, published by the Global Times in the Sport/Olympics sections. And the headline reads, "The Birthplace of Skiing, Northwest China's Xinjiang." The article is accompanied by an image of a ski resort in Altai, Northwest China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, attracting tourists from all over China this winter. Altai Prefecture, I'm hoping I'm getting the pronunciation of that correct, located in northwest China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, is widely regarded or acknowledged as the birthplace of skiing and can be traced back 12,000 years. In 2005, a group of farmers in the Altai region went to hide under a cave to escape the rain and found cave paintings depicting men lining up and stepping on twin snowboards with prey on their backs. According to archaeologists' analysis, the cave paintings were drawn 12,000 years ago and even earlier. After Beijing's successful bid to host the Winter Olympics, experts from 18 countries, including Norway, Russia, Japan, and Australia, visited Altai to study the potential origin of skiing activity, after which they jointly issued a declaration on January 18, 2015, recognizing Xinjiang's Altai as the earliest skiing region in the world. Standing at 45 degrees north latitude, dubbed the Golden Snow Line, Altai has also gained the reputation of being the country's snow capital, with its incomparably good snow quality, long snow period, and mild winter rarely found in other countries around the world. Australia is mentioned in the paragraph which has just been mentioned, and no more occurrences appear. Based on this first impression, one might make the argument that Australia is being constructed in a somewhat positive way, which is a bit of an anomaly, apologies for that, within the context of the relatively negative coverage for the week. With that in mind, we'll move along to the next piece. Published on the 16th of February in the economy section of the Global Times. This piece was written by Hui Qing, and the headline reads, "India's ban on Chinese apps is a self-destructive move." The article is accompanied by a photograph, and the captions of that photo reads, "Two women who often post videos on video sharing app TikTok shoot a video on a miniature cooking inside their house in Mumbai, India." The opening paragraph reads, "India reportedly issued a new ban on 54 Chinese apps and directed top app stores to block them in the country, recklessly remaining down the wrong path of escalating economic tensions with China." Citing a groundless security threat accusation, India's Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology issued the latest ban. Local news outlet Economic Times reported on Monday, noting that the government has banned around 224 Chinese apps since June 2020. It is now not breaking news that the Indian government banned Chinese apps. However, it does need to be pointed out that the move was announced at a time when India's foreign minister just finished his journey to Australia to attend the Quad meeting. It is no secret that the US-led Quad has been targeting China in many areas, including network systems. By vilifying the security of Chinese tech and tech firms, the US intends to contain the development of China to maintain its hegemony in the world. We'll take a closer look at mentions of Australia, and Australia was mentioned once in the paragraph just mentioned, and no other. Based on this, the next article was published on the 17th of February with the following headline, and that reads, China's Zero COVID Strategy, the minimum costs for maximum gain, economists say. This is found in the China/Society section of the Global Times with the following subheader. The policy of the Zero COVID Strategy helps secure stable global supply chains and cements responsible image. The article has an accompanying set of photographs, the first of which appears with the following captions. Medical workers wearing cartoon head decorations work at a vaccination site in Xuhui district of Shanghai. The next photograph comes with the following caption. A man walking in Wangfujing Street in Beijing with the Bing Duan Duan and Shui Rong Rong toys on February 5th, 2022. Shui Rong Rong. I think I may have gotten the pronunciation of that completely incorrect the first time around. The opening paragraph of the article reads, China's Lunar New Year holidays just ended. Yet across the country, factories have already been roaring back. Goods from iPhones, Tesla vehicles, and daily necessities to medical gear flow from the manufacturing powerhouse to brightly lit ports and are shipped abroad after a stringent disinfection and clearance process. That's a routine for China's supply chain under the country's dynamic zero-tolerance COVID-19 policy, which outshines the chaos in the US, where goods are piling up in ports and citizens are grumbling about supply shortage due to the pandemic and inefficient anti-virus efforts. With humming production lines securing stable employment and workers' income, a number of influential economists agree that the zero-tolerance strategy will only affect 0.6% of China's GDP, assuming the effect lasts a quarter, diluting the repercussions of a softness in service consumption in the world's second largest economy. We'll take a closer look at mentions of Australia, and it looks like Australia is mentioned once in the article. And that paragraph reads, using the data of the respective GDP per capita, we find that the total GDP in medium and high risk zones is just 2.6% of China's total GDP. Since there is still economic activity in these regions and the period being affected is typically 30 to 40 days, our estimate is that the economic impact will only be 0.6% of annual GDP. Raymond Yong, Chief Economist of Greater China at Australia and New Zealand Banking Group, also known as ANZ, told the Global Times. It appears that no further mentions of Australia in the article. Based on that first impression, I might make the argument that Australia is represented over here in a somewhat neutral manner. Although I suspect there is more than meets the eye if I were to read between the lines, but it's something that I'll worry about during the analysis stage. For now, I'm just going to mark it down as somewhat neutral. With that in mind, we'll move along to the next piece. This next article is published by Chen Hong, and it comes with the following headline. Morrison News Corp use Haigh's piece in GT as a tool to seek ugly political gains. This appears in the Viewpoint section of the Global Times, published February 17th, 2022 at 10:33 p.m. The article is accompanied by an illustration of China-Australia relations. The opening paragraph of the article reads, Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation has launched a vicious disinformation crusade with its outlandish fabrications of the so-called political interference by China in Australia's upcoming federal election, Its media outlets have been making outrageous allegations about so-called China's supportiveness to the leader of the opposition party to misinform and mislead the Australian people. It is a fact that the past several years have seen Murdoch media becoming an active political instrument or even a weapon to serve the dark interests of the far-right forces in Australia, and in recent days have increased the momentum to intensify the attack on Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison's opponent by playing the anti-China card. From the onset, I think it's pretty clear this article is presenting and portraying and constructing Australia in the most negative of lights. Morrison's approval in the following paragraph, Morrison's approval rating reportedly fell to its lowest in nearly 2 years in January, and the new poll conducted between February 9th and 12th shows that he still trails Labour leader Anthony Albanese, Bloomberg reported. In a desperate attempt to reverse the downward drift, he and Rupert Murdoch's News Corp are exploiting all means to start a scare and smear campaign on China, bizarrely linking their China threat theory with the opposition party. Global Times on Monday published an opinion piece written by former Australian diplomat Bruce Haigh, entitled "Weak Australian Leadership Inhibits Potential Relationship Reset with China." It said Albanese is not a lateral thinker, he is not creative, he will not be a charismatic leader. Albanese looks increasingly likely to win the election, not because of anything he has done, but because Morrison's LNP is imploding through corruption, failure to manage COVID-19, and a range of other anti-social programs and prejudices. This op-ed has been lashed at by some Australian politicians and Murdoch's media outlets as the quote-unquote smoking gun that Global Times and Beijing are interfering in Australian politics. Sky News said GT backs Anthony Albanese as Prime Minister as questions mount over Labour's ties with Beijing. According to news.com.au, referring to Deputy Labour leader Richard Marles and Albanese as a Manchurian candidate, an absurd remark that he was forced to subsequently withdraw. Morrison said the Chinese government has picked their horse and he's sitting right there. A ludicrous allusion directed at the Labour leader. Let's continue to look at the following and subsequent mentions of Australia in the article. Australia appears once again in the following paragraphs, and they read: newspapers are forums for a diversity of opinions, reflecting a spectrum of views and stances. So how could an article by a former Australian career diplomat reflect the Chinese government's policy? As an Australian citizen and keen observer of Australian politics, Haigh has every right to speak out his understanding and outlook in a media outlet of his choice. His recent Global Times piece reflects part of Australian public opinion on the abysmal state of the political reality in Canberra. Acting as one of the most enthusiastic vanguards in Washington's anti-China campaign, the Morrison administration has been fanning an anti-China frenzy, which has become even more inflamed in the election season. The Morrison government is now brainwashing the Australian public by inciting fear and panic with shameless lies about China. The slightest opportunity for their myopic political benefits has been taken advantage of and magnified in distortion. Such acts are despicable and pathetic, branded a liar and a hypocrite by political leaders from Australia and internationally. Morrison is no longer capable of decent political performance in an open and honest manner. With the ever-lurking challenges from his most formidable internecine rival Peter Dutton, a far-right anti-China politician, Morrison has been frantically trying to act tough and rough by imprudently manipulating Australia's foreign policy to survive in Canberra's brutal Game of Thrones. The anti-China card is Morrison's last resort to help salvage public opinion, and further impairment to Australia's relationship with China won't gain political benefits for him, only revealing his political immaturity and lack of political wisdom. Bilateral relations between China and Australia have been undergoing an ever lower downward spiral since mid-2017, and the previously mutually beneficial political, economic, social, and cultural exchanges and cooperation have been spoiled and ravaged to the dismay and disappointment of the wider community in Australia. Canberra's politicians obviously need more political wisdom and sensibility, not further political power games, which would only wreak more havoc to the relations of China and Australia. Chen Hong, of course, a regular in the Global Times commentating on Australia, is the president of the Chinese-Australian Association of Australian Studies and the director of the Australian Studies Centre at East China Normal University. Based on what has been represented and constructed so far, I think I'll make the argument that this is clearly representing and constructing Australia in not only a negative manner, but also a repulsive one. With that in mind, we'll move along to the next piece. Published on the 17th of February, this headline reads, GT Voice, UK-Australia geopolitical gimmicks for Indo-Pacific unwelcome. So not holding back at all, Australia is directly represented as negative in the headline already. Let's continue to unpack the article. Found in the source/GT Voice section of the Global Times, published February 17th, 2022 at 9:17 p.m. The article is accompanied by an image, a photograph with the following captions. US President Joe Biden participates in a virtual press conference on national security in the White House in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday, US time, with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison in attendance via video link. Biden announced that the US is forming a new Indo-Pacific security alliance with the UK and Australia. The opening paragraph is as follows. In a joint statement issued on Thursday after a video call between British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Australian counterpart Scott Morrison, the UK announced plans to commit £25 million to strengthen regional resilience in areas including cyberspace, state threats, and maritime security in the Indo-Pacific. It remains vague as to what exactly the UK and Australia intend to do in the Indo-Pacific region with such a plan. If they are interested in participating in the development of network and structure in the Indo-Pacific, the funds the UK announced is clearly far from sufficient to support any major project. More importantly, Australia and the UK do not have much of an advantage in the development of network technology, particularly 5G, and they cannot provide any hardware support. That makes it untenable that they are actually aiming to help develop network infrastructure in the region. A more plausible motive behind such a move is their ill-advised intention to blindly follow the US in the latter's containment strategy against China, which is in line with the two countries' previous attempts with the US. Both the UK and Australia are members of the US-led trilateral security partnership called AUKUS, which supports Australia's stated goal of acquiring nuclear-powered submarines, amongst other things. The UK's $34 million pledge might be another step related to the trilateral partnership. However, the figure is completely overshadowed by Australia's commitment under AUKUS and the future of the AUKUS may depend on how long Australia is willing to pay for the geopolitical confrontation game. We'll take a closer look at mentions of Australia in the article, and it appears it's occurring a number more times. This following paragraph reads, in terms of regional network infrastructure, which is still in the stage of construction, if developed countries like the UK and Australia have an interest in supporting such construction in the Indo-Pacific, regional countries will certainly welcome the investment. Of course, the premises are that their participation in network infrastructure construction is aimed at promoting regional cooperation, not instigating confrontation. As for China, it is important to point out there is no way that the UK and Australia can completely separate China from the development of Indo-Pacific internet network infrastructure and cybersecurity, given that the Chinese economy is already inextricably linked to other Indo-Pacific economies. The concluding statement or paragraph of this article reads, in this sense, if the UK and Australia want to use cybersecurity as a pretext to create a split in network construction in the Indo-Pacific region, they will only become unwelcome players that threaten regional stability and economic development. Based on this first impression of the article from the Global Times, I think I'll make the argument that pretty much clearly Australia is not represented in a positive manner, but rather in a directly negative manner. With that in mind, we'll move along to the next piece. Entitled Shark Attack. This piece was originally published by the AFP and now found in the Global Times Photo/World section. Published February 17th, once again, at 5:28 p.m. The article is a photo story, so there's a single photograph in question over here, and it comes with the following captions. A fisheries boat patrols near the fatal shark attack site on Little Bay in Sydney, Australia on February 17th, 2022, as authorities deployed baited lines to try to catch a giant white shark that devoured an ocean swimmer, the city's first such attack in decades. Photo is provided by the AFP. Based on this first impression, one might make the argument that Australia is represented here in a neutral manner. And with that in mind, we can move along to the next article. Published February 17th by the author Hui Qing. This headline reads, Business Quick Take. The spoiler, US is the real threat to ASEAN's development, found in the source/economy of the Global Times. The article is accompanied by a picture of the ASEAN flag. The opening paragraph of the article reads, a newly released survey on the perception of China and the US in Southeast Asian countries revealed that Biden's administration's frequent appearance in the region has seemingly, quote-unquote, paid off, with a hike of 10.4 percentage points in those who view it as a leading force in world trade. Confidence in Southeast Asia on the US's leadership in global free trade expanded from 19.7% last year to 30.1% according to the survey conducted by the ASEAN Studies Center at ISEAS, the US Yusof Ishak Institute, on Wednesday. China came in second place with 24.6% of the votes, an increase of 11.4 percentage points from the survey last year. In an overall view, China continues to be highly regarded as the most influential economic power by 76.7% of the respondents in a consistent trend since 2019, said the survey. Though China remains as the most influential economic power, The report noted that the US has gained significant ground in the last year from respondents across most ASEAN member states. We'll take a closer look at mentions of Australia in the article, and appears in the following paragraph. And that reads, "The truth is, taking Southeast Asia as an example, Washington is more of a spoiler in the region than a deliverer of any substantial benefits to the region. Holding the objective of confronting China, the US has been launching geopolitical games in the region with the intention of driving a wedge between China and ASEAN members. In fact, it has undermined peace and stability in the region. For instance, it has heightened the risk of nuclear proliferation in Asia-Pacific by setting up the AUKUS security partnership with Australia and the UK." No further mentions of Australia is found in this article. And to wrap things up with this piece, the concluding paragraph of the article reads, "The trend of Asia becoming the economic center of the world will not be reversed by Washington's political maneuvers, and the prospect of mutually beneficial cooperation between China and ASEAN will remain promising." Based on this initial impression of Australia's representation in the article, one might make the argument that Australia is represented in a negative light. With that in mind, we'll move along to the next article. Entitled Western Hubris, or rather with the subheading Western Hubris, and the headline reading, "The US's attempt to woo Pacific Islands serves its regional interests after realizing Western power vacuum in the region." This is found in the China/politics section of the Global Times. The opening paragraph of this piece reads, "The US is seeking to return to the Pacific Island region as US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken announced the reopening of the US Embassy in the Solomon Islands after 29 years, bringing the South Pacific nation back to the center of international politics as it still is recovering from the widespread riots in November 2021. Almost all the major media outlets did, in fact, use the phrase, "a move to counter China," in their headlines to describe the US's decision. Along with the US's absence in the region are the country's unremitting efforts to smear China's efforts to maintain cooperation with the Pacific Island countries. In the past decades, the US paid little attention to Pacific Island nations due to a belief that in matters of geopolitical competitions, such countries would be of no help, observers said. The US never seeks to maintain strategic stability with other big countries to safeguard global security, but instead focuses on manipulating a handful of smaller nations, and this will eventually harm the US and other nations. We'll take a closer look at mentions of Australia, and it appears in the following paragraphs. According to Yang Honglian, after the Fijian coup d'etat in December 2006, the US and Australia soon took the step to issue sanctions against the island nation, which caused Fiji to strengthen its connections with East Asian countries, including China. As the Fiji-China relations quickly developed, the US and Australia realized the West's power vacuum in the region and started to twist the situation. Australia is mentioned again in the section Our Backyard. And it says, "This is our backyard, not China's," quote-unquote, wrote an editorial on The Australian by Anthony Bergen, a senior fellow with the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Australia and the US must respond to both development challenges and geostrategic competition in the Pacific Islands. We can't afford the luxury of choosing, he said. The media that advocates cooperation with the West are not few. with a huge number of supporters, said a Chinese media employee who asked for anonymity in Fiji. Rough calculations will tell you the anti-China reports gained the upper hand. Among every 100 reports related to China, only about 30 are of positive content. Some local media outlets preach the China threat theory or the death trap, which are groundless, Yang said. China has truly been helping local island countries to improve the people's livelihoods by building hospitals, hydroelectric stations, or sports venues, he said. No further mentions of Australia is found in the article, and based on that first impression, I think I'll make the argument that Australia in this instance is represented clearly as an other with a negative light. With that in mind, we'll move along to the next piece. Entitled GT Voice, India faces tough choice in opening up its market. This next article is published on the 20th of February 2022 at 8:01 p.m. And the article emerged from the source/GT Voice section of the Global Times. The article is accompanied with an image of a view in Delhi, India on December 29th, 2021. The opening paragraph reads, "The Modi government, which has refused to join any regional trade agreement, seems to have finally realized that it has come to a point where its foreign policy must change course, or the country faces the risk of being shut out of global markets. India and the United Arab Emirates, UAE, on Friday signed a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, also known as CEPA, that is expected to increase bilateral trade to 100 billion over a span of 5 years. We'll take a closer look at mentions of Australia. And it looks like it appears once in the 3rd paragraph of the article. And that paragraph reads, "The first free trade deal signed by the Modi government, which marks part of the South Asian nation's recent efforts to pursue free trade deals with its trading partners, including the UK, the EU, Canada, and Australia, is undoubtedly an important shift of the country's attitude toward opening up to the rest of the world. Whether it is because of the pressure coming from the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP, that took effect at the beginning of this year, or from the pandemic-hit economy, India's pursuit of separate free trade agreements with other economies is generally beneficial to its opening up agenda." No further mentions of Australia is found in the article, and based on this first impression, one might make the argument that Australia is represented here in a neutral. I'm not sure if it qualifies as somewhat positive. It seems like it's stating Australia's relevance in a factual way. So for that reason, I'm going to mark it down as a neutral representation in this instance. With that in mind, we'll move along to the next piece. Originally published by the AFP, this next article reads, "Treasured Trash." The subheader, rather, is Treasured Trash, with the headline, "UK Waste Gets New Lease of Life," found in the Life/Culture section of the Global Times, published February 20th, 2022 at 7:21 p.m. The article has an accompanying photograph with the following captions: "Clothes made from waste materials at an exhibition in London," photo taken by the AFP. The opening paragraph reads, "From facial scrubs using coffee grounds to clothes made from plastic bottles and furniture decorated from agave fibers, efforts to upcycle or repurpose waste products are gaining traction in Britain. Every day, a bike courier for the skincare brand Upcircle visits 25 cafes in London and collects some 100 kilograms of coffee grounds that would otherwise be thrown away. Set up 6 years ago by Anna Brightman and her brother Will Brightman, Upcircle reuses the coffee grounds to make beauty products, adding ingredients such as chamomile infusions or a powder made from olive stones. We'll take a closer look at mentions of Australia in the article, and it looks like it appears once in the following paragraph. The burgeoning interest in repurposing food waste puts Upcircle in competition with other brands of natural cosmetics, such as Britain's Wild the Fruit or Australia's Frank Body, or even the UK giant Body Shop. Based on this initial impression, I think I might make the argument that Australia is represented here in a somewhat positive to a positive light, that it's part of a movement of repurposing food waste. With that in mind, we'll move along to the next article. Originally published by Reuters, this headline reads, Australian borders to reopen for visiting international tourists. Published February 20, 2022, 5:45 p.m. This is found in the World/Asia Pacific section of the Global Times. The article is accompanied by a photograph with the following captions. Protesters take part in an Invasion Day demonstration on Australia Day in central Sydney on January 26, 2022. Thousands of protesters marched across the country over the rights of Indigenous people, while others celebrated the anniversary of British colonisation. The opening paragraph reads, Australia will welcome international tourists on Monday after nearly 2 years of sealing its borders, relying on high COVID-19 vaccination rates to live with the pandemic as infections decline. The wait is over, Prime Minister Scott Morrison told a Sunday briefing at the Melbourne International Airport. Australia's opening to tourists is the clearest example yet of the government's shift from a strict zero COVID-19 approach to living with the virus and vaccinating the public to minimize deaths and severe illnesses. Most of the country's 2.7 million coronavirus infections have occurred since the Omicron variant emerged in late November. But with one of the world's highest COVID-19 vaccination rates, more than 94% of Australian people aged 16 and over are double-dosed, there have been just under 5,000 deaths, a fraction of the rate seen in many other developed countries. The article then moves on to say Australia has been gradually reopening since November, first allowing Australians to travel in and out, then admitting international students and some workers. At the onset, it appears that the article may be constructing Australia in a somewhat positive light, but the contrast in meaning making, having the image of Invasion Day juxtaposed on this idea that contemporary Australia is welcoming international tourists, certainly makes this article a difficult one to categorize. I believe it falls under the category of subtly negative. I'm not sure if that will be a permanent fixture, but I'm just going to write down that note for now, and I'm hoping when it's time for the analysis, there is a place and home for this new category. With that in mind, we'll move along to the next and final piece of the week. To conclude our look at the 19 mentions of Australia from the Global Times for the week is the article with the following headline, China-IIRMR Digital Poster Competition engaged Pakistan youth in Olympics 2022, found in the opinion/viewpoint section of the Global Times. The article is accompanied by the poster design with the following captions. Pakistani artist Habiba portrays a sense of quote-unquote together for a shared future as the winner in digital poster competition organized by the IIRMR. The opening paragraph reads, in connection with the final day of the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympic Games, the Lahore-based Institute of International Relations and Media Research, also known as the IIRMR, held a digital poster competition that lasted from February 8th to 18th. The competition aimed to inform Pakistani youth about China's ability to hold mega international sports events. A number of Pakistanis from throughout society in all 4 provinces submitted in their entries, pitched their digital understanding to convey the theme, Together for a Shared Future. We'll take a closer look at mentions of Australia in the article. And it appears like it appears when it appears once in the concluding paragraph. Digby Ren, visiting international relations scholar in Deakin University in Australia and Sichuan Normal University in China, gave a thumbs up to the IIRMR for making things happen, saying conduction of the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympic Games on international standards is a manifestation of the fact that China is a responsible global leader, knowing well how to raise the bar for others. In this instance, I think I'll make the argument that Australia is represented here in a somewhat positive to a positive light with this visiting international relations scholar whose background is in media and communication, with a current research portfolio that includes the Belt and Road Initiative, geoeconomics, as well as geopolitics. So, in a nutshell, based on this first impression, Australia constructed and represented, at least via the proxy of the visiting scholar from Deakin University, in this instance, as positive. With that said, that concludes our look at the representations and constructions coming in from the Global Times, 19 occurrences in total. And with that said and done, we can now move over to Sky News Australia. Sky News Australia has 10 mentions of China for the week running from Monday 14th of February through to Sunday 20th of February. The first article coming from Sky News Australia for the week has the following headline. China's Foreign Ministry Spokesperson blasts Australia for stoking confrontation and attempting to contain Beijing. China's Foreign Ministry Spokesperson Zhao Lijian described the Quad alliance as a tool to contain Beijing after partnership leaders met with Prime Minister Scott Morrison in Melbourne on Friday. Written by the digital reporter Zoe Zacek, published February 12, 2022 at 4:45 p.m. Now, strangely enough, it says here it's published February the 12th, 2022, meaning the article should have been bunched together with the previous episode. But I'll note that when I had published my podcast, the previous episode of this, on the 15th of February, that the article did not appear at that point in time. Could it be that this article was backdated to February the 12th? But that's all good anyways. I'm just going to take the approach of looking closely at the articles when they were published at the point of the production of the podcast. So strangely enough, even though this should belong to a previous episode, when I was looking at news representations from the 7th of February to the 13th of February, I'm only going to be looking at this now in this episode because I suspect this might have been backdated. With that pointed out, I would like to highlight that the article comes with an accompanying video, 3 minutes and 42 seconds in duration. The opening paragraph of the article reads, China has slammed Australia and its allies for stoking confrontation and attempting to contain Beijing following the Quad's latest gathering. The foreign ministers of Australia, India and Japan and the Secretary of State of the United States met in Melbourne on Friday for the 4th Quad Foreign Ministers meeting. The group reaffirmed the Quad's commitment to support the Indo-Pacific countries' efforts to advance a free and open Indo-Pacific without coercion. So clearly making the association that if you're on the Quad side, it's all good, no coercion. But if you're on the Chinese side, coercion will simply be in the mix. Based on this initial impression, one might make the argument that China is being represented in a negative manner. We'll move along to the next piece. The next piece comes with the headline, US-born Chen. Or rather, US-born Chinese figure skater Nathan Chen blasted on Weibo after winning gold in men's individual event. The subheader reads, the 22-year-old Olympic champion has been labeled a traitor after winning his first gold in the Beijing Winter Olympics individual event for Team USA. Reported by Crystal Wu, published February the 14th, 2022 at 10:10 a.m. The article comes with an accompanying video, 2 minutes and 26 seconds in duration, and the video's title reads, China recruits foreign-born athletes for 2022 Winter Olympic teams. The opening paragraph of the article is as follows. Olympics figure skating champion Nathan Chen has been labeled a traitor on Weibo, China's equivalent of Twitter, after he won his first Olympic gold in figure skating men's individual event for the United States. Weibo users blasted the three-time world champion, telling him to get out of China as they dubbed him a banana, a derogatory term used to describe someone who is yellow and Asian on the outside and white on the inside. The US-born and raised Chinese figure skater has previously refused to speak in Chinese interviews, claiming he could not speak Mandarin well, according to the New York Post. After his win last week, Chen was accused by the Chinese people of insulting China in an interview last year, where he threw his support behind fellow American ice dancer Evan Bates, who condemned China's human rights record. It's terrible, it's awful, Bates said when asked about China's treatment of the Uyghurs and other Muslim minority groups, according to Reuters. I have no problem speaking for the athletes and saying that what's happening there is terrible, and we're human beings too, and when we read and hear the things that are happening there, we absolutely hate that. We hate what's going on there. I agree with what Evan was saying, Chen said in response to Bates' comments. I think that for a greater change to occur, there must be power that is beyond the Olympics. It has to be changed at a remarkable scale. But the 22-year-old Olympics champion isn't the only Chinese American being condemned on China's social media. Last week, figure skater Zhu Yi was slammed on the same social media site after she fell on the ice 20 seconds into a routine and finished last in her Winter Olympics debut for Team China. The hashtag Zhu Yi has fallen went viral on Weibo, China's Twitter-like platform, gaining over 230 million views in a matter of hours before the hashtag was censored. The 19-year-old was born and raised in the United States but gave up her American citizenship to represent China. Her selection at the Games had already been a controversial topic after she was chosen at the expense of a Chinese-born athlete. Moving along to the next article, but before we do so, I would like to make the argument that in this instance, China is represented in a clearly negative light. With that said, we can move along to the next piece. The following article is written by Tyrone Clark, and it was published on February 15th, 2022 at 11 a.m. It's found in the Australia News/Politics section of Sky News Australia, and it appears with the following headline: Australians can't trust Labour to deal with Chinese Communist Party, says Matt Canavan. A Nationals senator has raised concerns over Labour's ability to stand up to China and said Beijing would prefer the opposition in power. The opening paragraph of the article reads, Beijing would prefer Labour in government, and Australians still cannot trust the opposition to stand up to the Chinese Communist Party, says National Senator Matt Canavan. The government continues to position national security as a key election battleground, drawing comparison to Labour's time in government on issues such as border security and defence. In light of recent allegations of Chinese interference in Australian elections, Mr. Canavan said there was still community concern surrounding Labour's ties with Beijing. My concern is that the Labour Party still has a lot of questions about its relations with the Chinese Communist Party, Mr. Canavan told Sky News Australia, and how much Australians could trust them to deal with China if they were elected to government. The article is further accompanied by another video, and that video is entitled China Will Try in Every Way to Influence Australian Politics. Moving along the article, a paragraph states Deputy Labour leader Richard Marles has come under fire for a speech he made in 2019 to Chinese students where he pushed for closer military ties with Beijing. To define China as an enemy is a profound mistake, he told the Beijing's Foreign Studies University. I firmly believe it is possible for Australia to maintain our strong alliance with the United States while also deepening our engagement with China. In fact, not only is this possible, it is vital. Mr. Canavan said these comments while 2 years ago was still made in a time where China was becoming increasingly assertive in the Indo-Pacific and the South China Sea. I'm sure China would prefer Richard Marles to be Deputy Prime Minister than Barnaby Joyce, given his stance on those issues, Mr. Canavan said. How hopeless could the Labour Party be to have their deputy suggesting something as insane as this and expect to be a party of government? This is the judgment of the people that want to be the government of this nation, and I think a lot of Australians have a little bit of concern given their very recent statements on how on whether they can be trusted to defend Australia's interest and sovereignty. Defence Minister Peter Dutton has also carried this attack line against the opposition, calling into question Labour's history with the Chinese Communist Party. Mr. Dutton made extraordinary claims last week during question time when he declared China had decided to back Labour at the next federal election. A further video accompanies the article in question. The video, in 7 minutes and 42 seconds in duration, comes with the title, Perhaps He Has Something to Hide. Richard Marles' Beijing speech disappears from website. Following on from that, the paragraph reads, We now see evidence that the Chinese Communist Party has also made a decision about who they're going to back in the next federal election, and that is open and obvious, Mr. Dutton said. And they have picked this bloke, Mr. Albanese, as their candidate. Opposition leader Anthony Albanese has vehemently rejected those claims and said he had confirmed with ASIO boss Mike Burgess that Labour candidates were not subject to foreign interference. In this instance, China is used as a proxy to draw the dividing line within Australian politics, And based on this initial impression, one might make the argument that this makes China, at least how it's constructed in this article, clearly negative, and not only that, repulsive as well. With that said, we can move along to the next piece. The next article directly engages with China's Global Times. This is found in the Australian News Politics section of Sky News Australia. The headline reads, China's Global Times backs Anthony Albanese as Prime Minister as questions mount over Labour's ties with Beijing. The subheader reads, China's global propaganda outlet has endorsed Anthony Albanese to succeed Scott Morrison as Prime Minister as Labour battles questions over its ties with the communist superpower. Written by Tyrone Clark, February 16th, 2022 at 9:10 p.m. a.m. Apologies. The article is accompanied with 103 comments. At this point, I'm wondering if I should be documenting some of the comments as well, because the resultant discourse as a result of such media diplomacy is certainly worthy of further investigation. That's something I'll be considering for my next episode indeed, but for the meantime, I would put this under the keep in view, calibration, modification, I guess, leveling up the quality of the podcast. With that said, let's unpack the article itself. The article is accompanied by a number of videos, first of which a 2-minute and 2-second video from Sky News Australia with the title Official Mouthpiece of the CCP Endorses Albanese for Prime Minister. The opening paragraph of the article reads, The Global Times has declared Anthony Albanese its preferred Prime Minister, arguing the Labour leader could improve relations with China. The Chinese Communist Party's English language propaganda outfit. I believe this is the first time the Sky News Australia has made use of such a term. After keeping track of what they've been saying and writing over the last 3 months, I believe this is the first time that such semantics are being employed. The CCP's English language propaganda outfit. In this instance, is offering its support for the opposition leader as it lashed worsening ties between Canberra and Beijing. The article argued the Labour leader positively shined over Prime Minister Scott Morrison, adding that he would be an uncharismatic but safe leader. The article has another accompanying video, 1 minute and 14 seconds in duration, with the title Morrison, Anthony Albanese is too soft on China. The following paragraph reads, Mr. Morrison received a grilling from the CCP's mouthpiece, which described him as a clown whose coalition government was imploding. Albanese is a cautious person and politician. He is not an intellectual. He has demonstrated a propensity to believe the US view of the world without analysis, the article said. He is not a lateral thinker, he is not creative, he is not and will not be a charismatic leader. He will be a safe leader, if not an ordinary leader. Nonetheless, in comparison to Morrison, he positively shines, and such is the abysmal state of Australian politics. Now, as I'm reading through this article, it's pretty clear that the Global Times is saber rattling directly at Australia, and Sky News Australia is returning the favor in the most direct of ways, with the Global Times mentioned in the headline already. We'll continue unpacking the article, and the next paragraph reads, The anti-Morrison hit piece criticized the Prime Minister's decision to call for an independent investigation into the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic in Wuhan. The article said Mr. Morrison had acquiesced to the United States in its worsening relationship with China, which it said was signaled by his dramatic turn with his Trump-inspired Wuhan COVID aspersion. Following initial assessments that the virus originated from zoonotic sources, World Health Organization boss Tedros Adhanom, I'm hoping I'm getting the pronunciation of that correct, said ruling out a lab leak from Wuhan was premature. The Global Times piece comes as the Morrison government attempts to frame the election around the issue of national security. Alongside the article are some tweets. In this instance, a tweet coming in from Bruce Haigh with the opinion Albanese will not be a charismatic leader, but he positively shines compared to Morrison. Such is the abysmal state of Oz politics. One would like to see a reset in ties with China, but Oz leadership is weak and US pressure is sustained. Following on from that, the article reads, Defense Minister Peter Dutton has carried a sustained attack line against the opposition, calling into question Labour's history with the Chinese Communist Party. Mr. Dutton made extraordinary claims last week during question time when he declared China had decided to back Labour at the next federal election. We now see evidence that the Chinese Communist Party has also made a decision about who they're going to back in the next federal election, and that is open and obvious, Mr. Dutton said. And they have picked this bloke, Mr. Albanese, as their candidate. The coalition has also been raising concerns over Labour's ability to handle the tense relationship with China as severe trade actions and embargoes remain on many key Australian exports. There is another accompanying video with the article, and this is a 3-minute and 2-second long video with the title, Labour has a pattern on behaviour on China. Following on from that, the next paragraph reads, Mr. Albanese recently said that while it was China's position on trade which had transformed, it required a change from Australia. China should certainly withdraw some of the actions that have been taken to stop Australian goods or products going to China, he said. The Prime Minister slammed his opposition counterpart and said the Australian government couldn't choose which industries should be protected from China's coercion. You can appease or you can stand up for what you believe in as a country, and no one has any doubts about our governments when it comes to which path we'll take, Mr. Morrison told Sky News Australia's Paul Murray. Based on this initial impression, one might make the argument that China is represented in a negative light, although there are interesting undertones of how China is being used. Maybe I could say it's overtones as well because it's pretty overt. China is being used as a proxy for creating political divides within domestic politics of Australia. With that said, we'll move along to the next piece. The article appears in the Australia News and Politics section of Sky News Australia and is accompanied with a video entitled Coalition Were Never Signed Up to China's Belt and Road Initiative, according to the PM. The headline reads, Coalition will never sign up to China's Belt and Road Initiative, PM, and the opening paragraph reads, Prime Minister Scott Morrison has defended his government's handling of China, declaring that we have not, never will signed up to the Belt and Road Initiative, published February 17th at 3:42 p.m. In the following paragraph, it is a matter of public record that the government's policy, both under the previous Prime Minister and I, has not been not to sign up to the Belt and Road Initiative, he said on Thursday. We have not signed up to the Belt and Road Initiative, never have, never will. Australia has been subject to economic coercion by the Chinese government, and we have stood up to that. We have worked with other countries around the world to stand up to the economic coercion of the Chinese government, which has only been met with more retaliation on Australia. I'm not the leader of a political party who was happy to trade away some coercion for another coercion. That's the leader of the Labour Party. the leader of the Labour Party is the Chinese government's pick at this election. Based on this initial impression, one might make the argument that China is in no way represented in a positive light. And once again, just like the two prior articles, China has been utilized as a proxy for drawing a line in domestic Australian politics. We'll move along to the next article. This piece was found in the opinion section of Sky News Australia and written by Chris Kenny. The article has an accompanying video 10 minutes and 31 seconds in duration, and it shares the headline with the written article, "Voters will not tolerate Labour pretending to be bipartisan on China." The opening paragraph reads, Sky News host Chris Kenny says Labour pretending to be bipartisan on standing up to China but attacking the government when it does so is a level of hypocrisy voters will not tolerate. Mr. Kenny said Labour was screaming about Prime Minister Scott Morrison calling Deputy Labour leader Richard Marles a Manchurian candidate on Wednesday. He said while this remark was a typical rhetorical overreach, the real point is Beijing wants Labour to win. Every criticism Beijing makes, the wildly threatening and overblown criticism that has come from China, has targeted the coalition government's actions. So of course, they want the government gone. And unsurprisingly, Labour hates anybody pointing any of this out. Listen to Labour's most recent Foreign Minister, Bob Carr, claim that Australia took a tilt against China. He went on to say exactly what Beijing would want Australian politicians to say, and that is to say that the fault is on our side. The politics are not limited to one side of the political aisle, and it's obvious that Chinese policy on the Labour side is not rock solid and incontestable. It's a live debate within Labour ranks. Based on this initial impression, I would make the argument that China is not constructed in a positive light, but rather in a negative one. And it seems like there is a trend in the Sky News Australia's reporting of China for this specific week. 10 mentions of Australia this week, far outstripping previous weeks when I've been looking at Sky News Australia and mentions of Australia. For instance, in the week prior, 7 February the 13th, 7 mentions of China. The week before that, 4 mentions. The week before that, 4 mentions. The week before that, from 17th January to 23rd of January, just 3 mentions. And this is the first time we're hitting double digits over the course of the last 2 months or so. So, impressions, negative. And the second point I'll make note of is, once again, China is being used as a proxy for drawing a line in domestic politics. With that said, we'll move along to the next piece. The next article is by Andrew Bolt, and it was published February 17th at 11:19 p.m. The article is accompanied by a video, 7 minutes and 28 seconds in duration, and the title mirrors the article's headline. Morrison's attitude to China based on conviction. While Scott Morrison is often attacked for being a marketing man, Sky News Australia says on February 17th, 2022 at 11:19 p.m, when making a decision about China's threat to Australia, he made it based on conviction, according to the Australian's Paul Kelly. He concluded that this was a threat not just in power terms, but in values terms. Mr. Kelly told Sky News Australia that China is a very different country to us in terms of its norms, of its ethics, and his Christianity is undoubtedly part of that. Mr. Kelly further discussed his new book, Morrison's Mission, with Sky News host Andrew Bolt. I think in this instance, this is a very clear case of othering, the conscious or unconscious assumption that a certain identified group poses a threat to the favored group in question. Are we seeing evidence of the construction of a negative and repulsive other as a foil for indirectly fashioning a positive and attractive self-identity? I believe in this instance, the answer to that is a very clear yes. And once again, China is used as a proxy for drawing a line in domestic politics. We'll move along to the next piece. The next article has the headline, "There is no reset moment with China." The article is accompanied by a video, 2 minutes and 57 seconds in duration. The article is brief, with the opening paragraph reading, "The Australian Strategic Policy Institute's Michael Hubris says, while some former politicians harbour nostalgic dreams of a return to past relations with China, it will never happen while Xi Jinping is in power. There is no reset moment," Mr. Hubris said. Based on this brief impression of what I think would be a summary of the video production, I think one might make the argument that China in this instance is, at least while Xi Jinping is in power, constructed as negative and repulsive, with the assertion that such a reset moment is a nostalgic dream that will not occur while the incumbent Xi Jinping is in power. We'll move along to the next piece. The article comes with the headline, "Defense Minister Peter Dutton blasts bully China for acts of aggression after laser attack on RAAF aircraft." Defense Minister Peter Dutton says China will pay a price for its acts of aggression after a Chinese Navy ship fired a military-grade laser at a Royal Australian Air Force aircraft last week. This was written by Jonathan Talbot, a deputy editor at Sky News Australia, published February the 20th, 2022 at 10:20 a.m. and on the date of access with already 37 comments. The opening paragraph of the article reads, Defense Minister Peter Dutton has blasted China for aggressive bullying after a Chinese Navy ship fired a military-grade laser at an RAAF aircraft last week. The article is accompanied with a video 3 minutes and 43 seconds in duration with the title, "Very Aggressive Act, Dutton Calls Out Chinese Warship Targeting RAAF Aircraft." The incident took place as a RAAF P-8A Poseidon monitored a Chinese destroyer and amphibious transport vehicle sailed through the Arafura Sea. Laser attacks are considered extremely dangerous and provocative and can injure pilots' impacts and aircraft's systems. The laser attack occurred in international waters, but was within Australia's exclusive economic zone and has been viewed as a major escalation of Chinese aggression in the region. Speaking on Sky News on Sunday, Mr. Dutton said the attack was very aggressive and that Australia would work closely with its allies to respond to Chinese aggression. I think the most important thing is to shine a light on those sorts of behaviors. I think the Chinese government is hoping that nobody...
Live to Brisbane.
Apologies for that. I think the Chinese government is hoping that nobody talks about these aggressive bullying acts, Mr. Dutton said. The Defence Minister also said that Australia and its allies would seek to respond to the deepening ties between China as well as Russia. Based on this initial impression, I think it's pretty clear China is not at all represented in a positive manner, but one of a negative light and one of aggression. We'll move along to the next article. The final article from Sky News Australia about China for the week reads, "Reckless and unprofessional. Labour slams China laser attack." Now, as I'm documenting the coverage from Sky News Australia, I have noticed that the links provided have seemed to have issues at the moment, with a 404 page not found. Either the URL is incorrect, or there's a technical issue, or the page is no longer available. And along with that, some of the other associated articles relating to the instance of the laser attack also appears to be missing in the Sky News Australia page. I'm going to try to see if I could work around it. So if I were to try to access the articles via the search, it doesn't seem to be appearing. And if I attempted to maybe try and mitigate that by heading into the subsection of the paper, so that's Defense and Foreign Affairs, maybe a refresh would do the job. Let's see. So I'm currently refreshing the Defense and Foreign Affairs page, but it seems that it's devoid of content. I'm not sure why that is the case. I'm going to refresh the search as well. And let's see if the articles are still there. They are indeed still there. So the previous article, Dutton, China will pay price for acts of aggression. But if I were to click on the final article for the week, the 10th article for the week, starting from 14th of February to 20th of February 2022, it looks like I am currently unable to access the article itself. The headline of the article, "Reckless and Unprofessional Labour Slams China Laser Attack." I'm just going to document that anyways. A bit of the blurb, I'm going to put it in there. I'm not sure why the link doesn't work. I'm just going to copy and paste it anyways, just so I have a record of its original URL. I'm really not sure why the page is no longer found. In any case, it looks like from the little information that is provided over here, China is clearly not represented in a positive manner, with the Labour Party condemning China's targeting of the aircraft and labeling it as reckless and unprofessional. This therefore concludes our look at news articles from Sky News Australia. 10 mentions of China for the course of the week, the majority of which labels and represents and constructs China in a negative light, and of which a number of these articles were making use of China as a proxy to draw a line within domestic politics. In contrast, there were 19 articles about Australia from the Global Times for the week. Thank you so very much for your continued support of the Australia-China Media Watch podcast. Please remember to return next week for episode 15th of the ACMW. Appreciate your support. If you could subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly and deeply appreciated. Until the next time, this is the ACMW signing off for episode number 14. Catch you all for episode 15 next week.